I'd like to welcome you to the celebration of Island authors. The library committee, which is Kate Muir, our Storytime librarian, and the bicycle delivery book service, we call, I think, Mellow Yellow. Jillian Biggle, our technical whiz, who's put the library collection online, and I'm Thora Hull. We would like you to meet today our Protection Island writers. For that, I would like to recognize and thank the Protection Island Lions Club, not only for hosting the series, but for giving us our beautiful library downstairs. I just had a little preview today. The lighting is wonderful. It's just a beautiful space. Thank you. And we especially want to thank Emily Barnwell. You know, isn't this amazing, all this technical stuff? Peter Fruin, Rick Biller, Jim Menzies, who we're really going to miss. Our welcome today is by Liz HK, and we couldn't be without the Girl Guides. We also have in our audience one of the esteemed authors, Craig Taylor. Just stand up for a sec, Craig, so people know. One of the best storytellers on the island is not on this video. Jim MacQuarrie is a brilliant photographer, communicator who used his expertise to make this presentation. If you want the impossible, ask Jim. Jim's work can be seen in Frank Gregling making his mask in stone, which you will find in the library. Thank you, Jim, wherever you are, someplace out, for sharing your artistry. Thanks to Kate, we have an impressive display of books, and they're all available for checkout from the library. And to help you when you go home, Jillian has made this wonderful little brochure, which I have someplace here. And it's a wonderful document to take, and as you needed something to read. So I would like to welcome you to our Protection Island writers.
I want to first thank the Mays for allowing us to record on their property, and with their welcoming figure, which is carved by Kwakwaka'wak artist Calvin Hunt. We thought it was an appropriate way to start this special series on stories and to start with a traditional land acknowledgement. Aishkael, siem na siya, siem na imushnatan mustimuk. Entha Liz Hammond Karima, Tani Tanak Kanak Protection Island, Tani Kanat Sanemuk. Entha Mana Gary and Dodie Hammond, who used to live on the island. Entha Icelandic, Scottish, Irish. Heichka Sanemuk. Tlaishan Squalowin Sanemuk Tumak Atanaquail. Good day, respected friends and family. I am Liz Hammond Karima. I live on Protection Island in Sanemuk territory. I am the daughter of Gary and Dodie Hammond. I am of Irish, Scottish, and Icelandic ancestry. On behalf of all of us, I want to thank the Sanemuk people whose traditional territory we have the privilege to be on and whose stories are embedded in the land.
The one I'm most proud of, I think, is Ancient Pathways, Ancestral Knowledge, because it was written almost as a compendium of everything that I'd been learning over the last, I've been doing this kind of work, learning from Indigenous elders for over 50 years. So after a while, and realizing the richness of the knowledge and the names of plants in all these different languages, I started thinking, how did people learn that? Where did they get it from? How did they share it? Bob will laugh at me. I always say I love making order out of chaos. It's what I do. I love Sudoku puzzles, and I love puzzles. And to me, looking at this huge amount of knowledge and practice and stories and words and names, trying to make some kind of order out of it and try and figure it out, its history, and that's what really made me interested in doing this work. I think one of the biggest privileges I've ever had or felt was to be able to meet these really wonderful and knowledgeable elders from many different communities and talk with them over what I call a mutual love of plants. So those people have enriched my life beyond measure. I can't put it into words. Indigenous people's knowledge has often been underrated and undervalued, say compared with Western scientific knowledge. And it's true that Western scientific knowledge is very powerful and important, and I wouldn't deny that for a minute. But my thinking is that Indigenous knowledge is also really important. This is knowledge that's based on countless generations of living in one place and close observation and being part of the ecosystem, really. From the time I started, when everyone said, my advisors, anthropologists, anybody I talked to said, well, you're doing this work, you better do it all in the next 10 years or it'll be gone. Here we are, over 50 years later. There's still people speaking their languages. They're not many, but there still are. There's still people who go out and pick berries. There's still people who go out and fish. And yes, there's a lot of modern adaptations, but the resilience of people to maintain that knowledge and practice and their connections to the land is just remarkable.
This production, The Great Gazoon, involved so many wonderful people, so many wonderful artists, and it happened right here in this house, which is amazing as well. It took 17 voice actors, musicians, and some of my dearest friends from the island here to work on this and make the music for this. It started out as a book, and the book went on for hundreds of pages. And then when I found out there had to be a second draft of the book, I thought, oh, someday, and I put the book away in a drawer, and then when it came time to tell the story, all these songs started happening around them. So we switched gears and went into making it an audio novel. So it's 4 CDs with musicians singing and voice actors acting and stories being told about a little boy that has to walk a tightrope way up above a mountain. And it's scary and it's fun and it's funny, and it was a wonderful project. And Valley and I did it all in our heads and put it out there and got all the people together to do it, and really happy with it. It really sounds good. This came about out of an experience I had walking tightrope. And yes, I was a tightrope walker once, and I learned a lot about fear in that time. And somehow I wanted to talk to people about fear and how you ride with it and how you use it and how you shouldn't try to hide it. I'm going to show you. There's a book that we have, and it's great. It looks wonderful. It's four CDs with a book, and it's exciting. I mean, can you imagine, right where I am right now, imagine there are 3 voice actors here, 1 voice actor over there, and wires running all across the room and microphones everywhere, and we're creating this story into something so far beyond what I thought it was going to be. That's the stuff. That's the stuff.
And when we were tasked to figure out how many whales there were on the coast, Mike decided to use this individual identification model. It's been used in Africa, and elephants and some cats and zebras and so on, using natural markings to actually identify individuals. So Mike thought it would work for killer whales, and when he goes, really? You know, so we started developing a technique for, it's a fingerprint. And yeah, it just grew from there. So my job was looking at all these photographs, taking photographs, but also examining them and realizing that every animal is identifiable. You know, as soon as you know a population at the individual level, then you can see how long it is before they mature and have calves, or when a male sprouts his dorsal fin and becomes sexually mature, and how these animals hang together, you know, and they're such cool social animals, you know, the residents, they stay together for the life, you know, they stay with mom, and that's almost unheard of in the mammal world. And no one would have believed it. An initial look at it, you go, oh yeah, this is just a, you know, it's a bull with his harem, you know, because they see a big bull swimming along with a bunch of female-like animals and assume that's what it's all about, but it's not. It's a mom and her sons, and the breeding takes place between different pods, and that gets into the dialects and so on, which, you know, John Ford's work, he was able to come along and start recording. I said, I think each one of these groups that sticks together has its own dialect. The residents, we call residents because they were here every year in the summertime when we were out doing field work. They would show up, and that's who we would see. But we were always getting these little groups of 3 or 4 animals, small animals. Who are these guys, you know? But they never associated with the ones we call residents. We just called them transients. They were just moving through. But it wasn't for a dozen years or more that we discovered that these guys are actually killing marine mammals. Their diet is totally different than the residents. So it looks like the same species, but it's probably not. You know, they've evolved down different pathways, and the resident type are salmon eaters, mainly Chinook salmon, and they're very specialized in that. And their movements are driven by their food. You know, basically why they're here in the summer is because they're feeding on migrating salmon inbound. And the transients, turns out they're eating marine mammals, and that's it. They wouldn't touch a fish to save their lives. And so to discover that, I was like, holy crap, you know, there's these 2 species that are living together in the same water. They won't have anything to do with each other. Their dialects are totally different. And it's a different species, but they both got killer whale costumes on, so that was huge. It is my life. My family and killer whales. Yeah, it's 50 years. I'm too old to retrain now.
It is a not very convenient field guide, because it's not really a field guide, but it's intended to be a field guide for identification of some of the marine life in BC. And then he decided that they were going to include a seaweed section. So they needed help. I've done a lot of technical stuff since 1972 on seaweeds, so I know them pretty well. Started diving in 1972 when I got interested in seaweeds, and I've sampled in BC. Been on about 4 expeditions on Navy auxiliary ships out along the west coast, along the inner Strait of Georgia area. Done one big trip up to Portland Canal, up the inner coastal inlets. Circumnavigated Haida Gwaii. For a long time I've been interested in terrestrial plants, and a lot of the seaweeds look kind of similar. In terms of the aesthetics of them, they're really beautiful, some of them. Quite elegant. They're not all just, most people see the rotten stuff on the beach, you know, the slime and the smell. That's not what they're all about, so some of them are really quite elegant. But if you go to a place like Botanical Beach on the west coast, any sites in Haida Gwaii on the outer coast, you're wading up to your hips pretty much in seaweed. they're the dominant thing out there. If you go to inner coasts, there are not as many of them, not as prolific, not as many kelp, for example. Or if you go to the tropics, they're much smaller and they're more, less obvious than they are here. But anywhere out on the west coast, it's a dominant thing to see different types of kelp, and they're spectacular. We've got more kinds of kelp along our coast than anywhere else in the world. So the charismatic seaweeds, the big kelp, are sort of comparable to Graham's killer whales and Jane's sea otters. They catch people's attention because they're big and they're relatively easy to identify. I'm always teasing Graham about how easy it is. It's too easy with the charismatic megafauna compared to the not so charismatic microflora, but they're pretty charismatic. A lot of them have to be looked at with a dissecting or a compound microscope to see the beauty of them and to see why they're interesting. Charismatic animals can't compare to seaweeds for life history diversity. I mean, these things do all sorts of strange things and have different patterns of reproduction that the animals can't even come close to. There's a male and a female, and that's it, right? in the killer whale world.
This was written in 2007, I notice, which is 14 years ago. So Sean was just 3. And of course, I write these little books for my grandson, my Canadian grandson, to give him a little glimpse into what my childhood was like. And Sandra in Ballyhalbert is written about our cottage in Ballyhalbert, which is on the east coast of Ireland. And we spent all summer there every year, from the day school got out until the day school went in. And we were there with our grandparents, our parents, aunts and uncles and cousins, and we all were there for the summer. So it was my very favourite place to be. And my father actually painted the picture that's on the front of the book, because he loved to paint pictures of cottages in Ireland. And the time I spent there was just a magical time. And so it has very many happy memories for me. And the interesting thing is that I didn't think anybody other than Sean would be interested in this little book, but I've had lots of requests from cousins in Ireland for their grandchildren. So these are people who spent the time here as well, but their grandchildren will learn about it through the little book. I don't think of myself as an author because I don't write books to sell them or to publish them. I think of myself as a Seanachie because I like to tell stories about my family and about my childhood and for the generations to come. And for instance, this little book, The Dargle, was written about my grandmother's house, and that's the house I was born in. And it was a little row house in Belfast. The Dargle was the creature that lived under the stairs. When we were children, my brother and I were afraid to go into the cupboard under the stairs. We were convinced that there was a creature that lived in there, and we didn't want to go in there. And so the Dargle is what we imagined this creature to be. I just wanted Sean to sort of get a glimpse of his family in Ireland and of his grandparents and little stories about myself. I've written others that haven't been put into book form yet. For instance, there's one about me getting my first pair of roller skates. I just basically wanted him to have to sort of understand that his grandmother grew up in a different time and in a very warm family. And we did have a warm family when I was growing up, and we were very close to each other. And that extended to cousins and aunts and uncles and grandparents and great-grandparents.
Dead reckoning, first of all, means it's kind of a rudimentary way of navigating. And it seemed like a good, I was flying at the time, that was another hobby, had a Cessna. So I had aviation on my mind, and dead reckoning seemed like a nice metaphor for kind of feeling your way towards some kind of reckoning, some kind of resolution, and a way of making your way up through life. It's in 3 sections. The first section is to do. There's some stories about the North, and I was young when I was there and working in a hangar, and the stories are about that experience of a young man in the North with not a lot of awareness, kind of blundering along, yeah. And it was a job I was offered at the time. It was what they called a hangar jockey, and that was exactly that. You maintained the hangar and swept the snow up and warmed up the aircraft. Next section is sort of the opposite of that, and stories that are contemporary. Well, one is about a dairy farmer who's finding that he's falling behind in the technology side of things, and whether he likes it or not. That's why I wrote that story. I have no idea, but it was something that interested me. Another one is about a couple that's falling apart, but they don't realize it, and especially the antagonist, the writer, the narrator, who there's all sorts of clues turning up that suggests that things aren't good, but he doesn't seem to see them. And so the final story that makes up this is called The Steps, and because in the story, the fishing guide, is very skeptical of this German immigrant or guest. And his abilities to survive, that he has no real concept of how wild it is out there, and but on the other hand, he's also very interested in where this German fellow is going to take him. When I started to think of myself as a writer, then I thought, well, there's some interesting stuff here. I should really give it a look at, So anyways, so I'm waiting for Spielberg now to to phone me up and say, hey, I just read your story. It's time for it to reincarnate again.
My book, A Good Day Fishing, is about a girl and her dad spending a day together trying to catch a fish. While they do that, they are observing all the other creatures around them that are doing exactly the same thing as them. But the story is really about connections. The connection between the girl and her dad, as well as their connection to the animals around them, and how we all rely on a healthy ecosystem. It's all one picture. The book is aimed at young children and has been popular with kids as young as 2 and up to well over 7. I've always loved the forms and colors of the sandstone shore and looking at the life it supports. Creating this book allowed me to illustrate some of that, something I really enjoyed.
It's an extended portrait, a kind of arc of narrative about a young woman from Manitoba who winds up going to Italy and learning to be a baker in Venice, and then comes back to Canada and opens a bakery in Nelson, British Columbia, and back in the hippie days, and then a whole series of untoward events transpire to create the narrative of the book. For me, songwriting has always been primarily a marriage of a narrative art and a musical art together, and the kind of songs I've written have always tended to be story songs, So I'm kind of known in the folk music business in Canada as a narrative songwriter as opposed to singing about feelings. So I've always told stories in the songs. And about 10 years ago, I got the idea that maybe I should try telling a longer story than the 3 or 4 or 5 minutes that a song involves. I specifically chose not to be autobiographical because I'd had colleagues and friends who were musicians who'd written books, and they tended to be about musicians writing books. And I thought, well, I'm going to stay as far away from this as I can. I wanted it to have a musical component, so the lead character in the story plays the flute, and her boyfriend plays classical cello and is a composer. And I kept it in the classical music realm to avoid bringing my own personal experience into it too much, because then you get into in-jokes and things that only musicians understand, and I was afraid I would lose some of the accessibility of the images and the narrative. Lyric writing encourages you to be concise, because when you write songs, you've only got maybe 65, 120 words at the most in 2 or 3 verses of a song. If you write a song lyrics out, for most songs, at least the ones I've written, they fit on 1 page. You tell the story with as few words as possible, because songwriting is rhythmic, because it's accompanied by music, that writing fiction, you can think in those same kind of terms of rhythm. And one of the disciplines that I engaged in when I was writing this book, and in any writing I've done a fictional sort, is to read it aloud. I'm in the middle of a new project, because this book came out 7 years ago, so I've been doing things since, of course. I've written a lot of songs, and in the last 4 years, I started writing short stories based on the narratives in some of the songs that I've written over the decades that I've been doing this. And I took to reading passages from the short stories at concerts and then singing the song. So I would read like 3 or 4 pages out of one of the short stories, and then I'd tell them what I was doing. I'd say, this is a story based on this song. I'd read 3 or 4 pages, and then I'd sing the song. And the audiences found that very engaging.
So this book took about 6 years to write, and I like to think of it as like a non-fiction novel with about 80 different narrators. So it's the voices of people, of real people in New York. I spent a lot of time with them, interviewed them again and again, and the idea was just to get people speaking about their city and their experience of New York, their life there, their struggle with it. I love talking to people all over the social spectrum. So I'm less interested in historians and pundits and politicians, and I'm more interested in people who work the city, and for me, it's great to know places that are immense living organisms like New York and London, where I can live a life of anonymity. I can be exposed to every type of different lifestyle, every type of different person. And then I like, what this community offers, which is being known on a very personal level. And I think that's very important. My first book was about a tiny village in Suffolk, and I love some of the lessons I learned from that. One can be truly eccentric in a small community because people see you not as a type, but for who you are. And there's a sense of cohesion that is here and can be found in small communities. That is something that you just can't build in a huge city, or it's very hard to build in a large city. So I love the two different poles. I don't really like the in-between. I don't like, the medium-sized city, but give me the big megalopolis and give me the tiny protection island, and that's a good split. You want to be known in a place. You want to feel like you can be part of a community, especially as the world changes and that becomes more important. But also the lure of the massive city is just incredible. It's a place of constant reinvention, and especially in a place like New York, where people there are able to kind of mythologize their lives and become something different. Like, you can't just turn your life around on Protection Island. People know you, they know your parents, they know your past. But I love the idea that in a place like New York, for, as long as it's been a city, people have shown up and just been like, this is my stage to be who I want to become now. So those two different poles I just find to be really compelling. Well, it's a great way to spend your life. It's given me an excuse. In a time when journalism has gone through, some catastrophic changes, it's been a way too of getting away from a sort of day-to-day grind and writing nonfiction that is more immersive. And so that's allowed me to do what I love about, nonfiction writing, which is spending time with people and getting to know a place. And they're just adventures, like they're excuses to go and be in a city.
Snapshot of a Soul Place is a celebration of our granddaughter, Miel, when she turned 25. Miel was born with Down syndrome, and her mother, Carrie Burke, is an extraordinary writer and visual multimedia artist who'd never really had a collection of her work beautifully presented. So we decided to collaborate, and she sent me all her writings and paintings, and I covered my entire living room with them and assembled them into this beautiful memoir of Miel's life from the time she was a baby till the time she was 25, telling about the challenges and victories and joys and sorrows of her life, told in poetry and prose, cartoon, photographs. And then Ronan Latazunel here on the island designed the book, and we wanted to do a hard copy book that was nice to touch, because there aren't that many books, beautiful coffee table books on people with special needs, and we wanted to make one. I think it's a miracle. Miel had 3 heart surgeries in her life. It was a miracle that she had lived to a healthy 25. And I really felt that Carrie's work needed to be seen, needed to be presented. And so those 2 ideas came together in such a beautiful way in this project. There was just so much material. There were so many great paintings and drawings, and then after we had figured out what we wanted to do, who was going to actually put it together in book form for us? And when we met Ronan, it was just a marriage made in heaven, and I don't think Ronan and Carrie actually met until the day that we did the book release here on Protection.
Moss-hung trees, a deer moves into the hunter's silence. And I read this on a bus, and it was like, oh my God, because I was a photographer at the time, and I was writing a lot longer poems and some articles for newspapers. But that to me it was like it just captured a moment. So at that juncture I thought, okay, I gotta learn about this. So I learned about it and I started writing my own. And what the masters tell you is if you can write one perfect haiku in your lifetime, you've done it. Well, haiku it's an ever-evolving art. So traditionally it's 3 lines. It's always under 17 syllables. You can't have more than 17 syllables. But I've seen haiku recently in the Haiku Canada publication that's doing everything in 1 line, which is an interesting thing, and doing things more block style. But it's usually nature oriented. There should be a word in there that indicates a season. You've got to make room for your reader to be able to interpret something, to get their own meaning out of it, and showing something and not telling something is a way of doing that. Basho, who is the greatest Japanese master, wrote, haiku is simply what is happening in this place at this moment. Rusting baby buggy fills with pink cherry blossom petals. A new son born from the hospital window, cherry blossoms and rain. In a dark cupboard full of coats, cherry blossom petals. This was my favorite one that I wrote last year, and I did it all in one line, broken pages bleed poems. Well, I've been writing since I was 12 years old, and writing to me is part of who I am. If I can't write, if I can't create, I don't feel very valid as a human being. So to me, writing haiku or even writing longer poems, which I still sometimes do, makes me feel validated.
This is all about the steam navigation on the Yukon River from the late 1800s through the Klondike Gold Rush and up to the 1950s, all the way from northern BC and the headwaters down to the Bering Sea, St. Michael's, and just around the corner from the mouth of the Yukon River. So linearly it's a long story, and it covers about 70 years of when there were steam-powered vessels on the Yukon, including this fascinating period of the gold rush. The time around 1896, 97, 98 to the turn of the century was a fascinating period. People from all over the world went scrambling up to try and get rich in the Klondike gold fields. And these often very quickly built paddle wheelers were one of the main means of transport and supply, because there was times during the gold rush when they were really concerned that people were going to be in a famine kind of situation. The supplies weren't coming in, especially in winter when there was freeze up. So during the navigation season, these were the boats that brought in all of the supplies, the machinery that they needed. On the west coast, the First Nations people worked in the canneries on a seasonal basis, because the canneries were run seasonally. So they traveled on the CPR steamships from the west coast, or all along the west coast, from their homes to the canneries. And there were lumber camps up the coast, and people would take the steamships into Vancouver, the loggers for a weekend off and a fling. So it was connected to all of those sorts of stories. It also made the whole industrial history of BC, for example, essentially possible. That's been one of the exciting parts of more recent years when I've been traveling. Like in China, for example, I rode with the engine crews of a large hand-fired locomotive in Inner Mongolia through the mountains, and they were doing exactly the same things that the old-timers from the Canadian Pacific were doing in the Rockies, but before the 1950s, when diesels came in here. Watching the BC ferries go by, I have not much difficulty seeing the CPR's Princess boats going by, or being tied up over at Newcastle, where they were during the Depression years, and you could go and rent a cabin on one of the steamships, because Newcastle was a CPR park.
It's a memoir of a certain part of my life, a little bit of my personal history. It's a book about the history of Protection Island to some degree, in the years that it takes place. It's a little bit about community and people and building friendships. And lessons learned that I learned about gardening that I wanted to pass along to other people. People that I met that I loved. We became good friends over a garden. Right, gardening together, or it was just for me, the whole gardening thing is such a pleasure, and I just think that other people could benefit from thinking that way, maybe a little bit. Like, it doesn't have to be a chore, and if it is, go away and do something else. Gardens are an extension of the person who's creating it, and so they're very I think intimate places. where some people just put their heart out into a garden. So you walk in and you feel that, right? It's like, yeah, this is a wonderful garden. And I had that experience many times over the years with different people. Every garden is different because every person is different. Every person that creates a garden has something different to put into it. Two people right next door to each other could have exactly the same plants in their garden, but you'd walk into one or the other and you would feel the difference in them immediately. So it's not really even the plants. It's the joy of being in the garden. Stu's place became my Tuesday garden, and we'd begin our morning with a committee meeting at the kitchen counter. We'd sip coffee and entertain each other with random theories about the state of the world or discussions of philosophies, books, or articles we'd enjoyed, interspersed with lively conversation about what work needed to be tackled in the garden and what could be planted in different areas of the yard. Stu decided he wanted to bring monarch butterflies to his garden. Recognizing a great gardening challenge and undaunted by the fact that sighting a monarch butterfly was practically unheard of in our part of the country, we optimistically sallied forth. We decided to do whatever we could to attract these precious beings. We were the epitome of ignorance is bliss. Sometimes Stu and I would stand at the railing overlooking the garden and comment on what we'd achieved. A swallowtail butterfly would come flitting through, or little orange skippers would skip through the lavender. Various admiral butterflies and longwings would come to visit, but although we were delighted to see the different varieties, we didn't really get to know them very well. And as it turned out, it wasn't the butterflies as much as creating the garden that gave us so much pleasure. I'm really happy about this book. I think that I did a great job. I think Valley and Ronan, who helped me with this, were absolutely essential to what this is now, right? Because I just had an idea, and once I got it down on paper, it turned into something wonderful. And lots of people seem to like it. So that's good.
Dazzle Patterns is set in 1917. It starts with the Halifax explosion, so it's set in Halifax. And there are 3 characters in the book. There's a woman who's working in a glass factory in Halifax. There is her fiancé who's fighting in the trenches in France. And there's a German immigrant who's working he's a master glass crafter, working in the glass factory. And then the plot built itself around this woman, Claire, who's working in the glass factory, and she loses an eye during the Halifax explosion. And she eventually goes to study art at the art school, where Arthur Lismer was the director at the time. And it really became a book about vision and seeing, inner vision and outer vision. But in a larger sense, it's a book about art, love, and war. But I actually started out with this idea of writing a story from my grandfather's life. He met my grandmother in Halifax. She was working there. She grew up in the country, like my protagonist does. She was working in Halifax because so many people died in the Halifax explosion that they needed workers in the city. So she left the country and came to work in Halifax. And she met my grandfather, who was working, he was in the Merchant Marine, and he was from Shetland, and they met in Halifax. Maybe some people plan their plots out ahead of time really well, but I think it's more normal especially for a long project like a novel, for the novel to kind of create a life of its own and you just kind of follow along. So I knew I wanted it to start in Halifax, but I actually didn't want to dwell too much on the explosion, but the explosion was such a dramatic event that it just kind of sucks in all the energy of the book, because it's so dramatic. You know, a lot of life was lost, there was a lot of injury, and children blinded and all kinds of stuff. So you can't really gloss over it. So I found that starting the book there, I really did have to dig into the explosion. I think I just had a story to tell, and I got dug into it, and then I just couldn't really let it go. So it's more like there isn't a driving reason, it's more like a habit of mind. You start on
a piece of work. And in that way, the painting and writing are similar, you know, and I learned a lot about that through painting. Just keep going, keep listening to the work, just keep on, and something will form, you know, something that makes sense.
How does it feel to you to know that your work, your legacy, is in the local library here on the island?
Oh, I love that. I love that my books are here on the island. Yeah, it's very special, and there's a lot of really passionate readers here on the island, and you know, the people who keep the library going, and they're great champions of books and writers, and it's a real privilege to be part of the community.
Stories give meaning to the land. They give meaning to our being. I would like to raise my hands to the traditional story keepers and to our story writers, and also our story keepers, the librarians, and the library volunteers who work to keep our stories alive. Haichka.
Again, thank you to all who made this day possible. We welcome anyone who would like to work with the library committee to host events. To be in touch with us, you can contact us at pibeacon@gmail.com. We do have some events coming up, one of which is David Essex book launch, and video, book and video launch, I guess it is, Fair Days. It will happen on April the 9th, and there's a big day that day on the island. There's a memorial for one of our friends on the island, and from 1 to 3, and then come on down from 3 on to hear David sing and play. We're going to have a library book sale April 23rd to 24th, and there are just a wonderful collection of books there for people. If you care to donate, let Kate Muir know. This summer, there will be, during July and August, the summer story time in the park. And it's hard to believe, but this library has been functioning for 10 years. So in September, we're going to have a big celebration of what's going on, what's happened, and come. In terms of the library opening, that still has to be announced. We're just easing into the post-COVID time, but you'll be given lots of notice when you come down and see our our renovated space, wonderful lights, lots of good books. So thank you for being with us today, and enjoy seeing the video.